The first signal came on a Tuesday, and it came from the dark. Relay Station Kappa 9 sat on the edge of nowhere, spinning slow and cold above Pluto's pale face, and the two technicians who worked there had not heard anything interesting in over a year. They monitored empty space, they drank bad coffee, and they waited for their rotation to end, until the signal hit their screens like a scream. It was not in any human language. It was not in any frequency they had been trained for. It was broken and repeating, full of static, and something underneath the static that sounded almost like singing. And the younger technician, a man named Davi, leaned forward and whispered, "What is that?" While the older one, a woman named Harsha, was already reaching for the emergency relay to Earth. 3 hours later, the entire United Earth Council knew what the rest of the solar system did not yet understand. Something was coming, and it was not small. The telescopes found them within a day, more than 300 ships drifting in loose formation toward the sun. And they were not human ships, not anything close. They were long and curved, like the ribs of some enormous creature, their hulls dark, but flickering with faint light that pulsed in patterns no one could read. Some of the ships were damaged, trailing debris and frozen gas. Others were barely holding together at all, and the whole fleet moved with the slow, exhausted momentum of something that had been running for a very long time, and had finally stopped trying to run. Earth had never seen alien life before, not like this, not real and close and desperate. The signal was translated within 48 hours by a team of linguists and mathematicians who did not sleep and survived on caffeine and fear. The message was simple, and it repeated itself over and over. We are the Vathari. We carry 1,200,000 souls. We have no fuel, no food, and no place left to go. If anyone can hear us, we ask only for the chance to live. The Vathari. Nobody on Earth had ever heard that name before, but the galaxy had. They were a spacefaring species, old and proud, with tall, slender bodies and hollow bones, and skin that glowed with soft bioluminescent light. For thousands of years, they had been members of the Galactic Concord, a vast coalition of more than 40 alien civilizations that governed a large portion of the Milky Way. The Concord was powerful and ancient, and it ran on rules that did not bend. Every species had a classification, a place, a role, and every deviation from that role was treated not as growth, but as disease. And the Vathari had deviated. A mutation had spread through their population over the last century. It was not harmful, not dangerous, not contagious to any other species. What it did was change their bioluminescence, their glow, the light that lived under their skin, making it shift in unpredictable patterns and colors that the Concord's rigid classification system could not categorize. To the Concord, this was unacceptable. If a species could not be classified, then it could not be controlled. And if it could not be controlled, then it was a threat. The Arcanate, the ruling council of the Concord, had given the Vathari a choice. Submit to genetic correction, a painful and often fatal process that would strip the mutation from their children forever, or leave. The Vathari refused the correction. They said their light was theirs, and they would not let anyone take it from them. And so the Concord took everything else. Their homeworld was seized, their stations were shut down, their trade routes were blocked, and they were loaded onto their own ships and pushed into the black. For 2 years, the Vathari flotilla drifted from system to system, begging for help. 3 Concord species fired on them when they got too close to their borders. 7 others refused to respond to their signals at all. Fuel stations would not let them dock. Medical ships would not answer their calls. Their children grew thin, and their elders grew quiet. And their lights, those beautiful, defiant, shifting lights, grew dim. And then, at the very edge of their fuel and their hope, their sensors found a small yellow star with a small blue planet orbiting it. And that planet was broadcasting music and noise and chaos into the void, like it did not know or did not care who was listening. Earth was not a member of the Galactic Concord. The Concord considered humans primitive and unimportant, a young species barely a few centuries into space travel, not worth conquering and not worth inviting. Earth had no seat at the galactic table, no voice in the Arcanate, and no idea what the Vathari were until the signal arrived. But Earth had something the Concord did not: a memory. Humans knew what it meant to be cast out. They knew what it meant to cross oceans and deserts and borders with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the desperate hope that someone on the other side would let them in. Every culture on Earth carried that story in its bones. And when the Vathari signal was played in the United Earth Council chamber, when the translators read out, "We ask only for the chance to live," the room went very still. Then the Concord's message arrived. It came through official channels, cold and formal and sharp as a blade. The species-designated Vathari has been classified as a civilizational contagion and expelled from the Galactic Concord. Any entity that provides harbor, resources, or aid to the Vathari will be considered in violation of Concord quarantine law and will face appropriate consequences. You are advised to deny entry and report their position to the nearest Concord patrol. The Secretary General of the United Earth Council was a woman named Adaize Okonkwo. She was 61 years old, with gray hair and steady hands, and a voice that could fill a room without ever rising above a conversational tone. She read the Concord's message aloud to the full chamber, and when she finished, she set the paper down and looked at the assembled representatives of every nation on Earth. "They are telling us," she said, "that if we help these people, there will be consequences." The room was silent. "They are telling us that 1,000,000 souls, including children, should be left to die in the dark because their skin glows in the wrong color." She paused and looked around the room one more time. "We were not asking for their permission." The vote was not unanimous. It never was, not on Earth, where disagreement was considered a feature and not a flaw. But it was overwhelming. The motion passed with 87% approval, and within the hour, Earth's deep space communication array turned toward the incoming flotilla and broadcast a message on every open frequency, in every human language, and in the broken Vathari code the linguists had pieced together. "All vessels, reduce speed. You are cleared for Sol approach. We are preparing aid and shelter and medical support. Do not be afraid." And then, because the person writing the message was a young communications officer who had tears on her face and did not care who knew it, she added one more line, one that would be carved into memorial walls and taught to school children and remembered long after the stars themselves forgot what they had done. "Welcome to our system. You are not alone anymore." 300 ships changed course toward the small blue world, and for the first time in 2 years, the lights under the Vathari skin began to glow bright again. Nobody on Earth had ever tried to welcome 1,000,000 aliens before, and it showed. The first problem was air. The Vathari breathed a nitrogen-oxygen mix similar to Earth's, but with a slightly higher nitrogen content, which meant they could survive on the surface, but would get headaches and fatigue after long exposure. The second problem was food, because Vathari biology could not process most Earth proteins without getting violently ill. The third problem was radiation, because their ships had been leaking for months, and nearly a quarter of the refugees had some level of radiation damage in their hollow, delicate bones. The fourth problem was that there were 1,200,000 of them, and Earth had about 72 hours to figure all of this out before people started dying. Juno Achebe had not slept in 3 days. She was 34 years old, a logistics coordinator stationed on Lunar Processing Hub 7. And her job, her entire job, the thing she had trained for and built her career around, was moving cargo. She was supposed to move cargo, not people, and certainly not alien people who spoke a language her translator could barely handle, and whose medical needs were a complete mystery to every doctor in the solar system. But here she was, standing in a converted cargo bay that now held 600 Vitari families, watching a medical team try to figure out how to set a broken arm on a species whose bones were hollow like a bird's. And she was holding a tablet that showed her exactly how many supply requests were still unanswered. The number was 4,000 and climbing. "We need more nitrogen canisters on Deck 9, someone shouted behind her. "We needed them yesterday," Juno muttered. And she made it happen, because that was what she did. She made things happen. She did not understand the politics, did not care about the Concorde's threats, did not have time to think about the galactic implications of what Earth had just done. She had 600 families who needed clean air and safe food, and beds that would not break their fragile bones, and she was going to give them those things, or she was going to die trying. Across the hub, in a quarantine area that had been hastily converted into a meeting room, an old Vathari named Korath Sen sat on a bench that was too short for his long legs, and stared at the wall. Korath was tall even for a Vathari, and his skin, which should have glowed with the soft blue-white light of a healthy elder, was dim and gray. He had been an ambassador once, a respected voice in the Concorde's diplomatic circles, a being who had shaken hands with the leaders of 12 species and spoken in the great halls of the Arcanate itself. Now, he was a refugee sitting on a metal bench in a cargo station orbiting a moon he had never heard of, waiting for a species he had been taught to consider primitive to decide his people's fate. He did not trust them. He could not trust them, not after everything. Every species the Vithari had asked for help had either ignored them or attacked them. The Tessic had fired warning shots. The Moravi had jammed their communications. The Dreth had simply gone silent and pretended they did not exist. Every single one of them had calculated the cost of compassion and decided it was too high, and Korath had watched his people's hope die a little more with each rejection, until hope itself felt like a kind of cruelty. So when the humans said welcome, Korath heard, "What do you have that we can take?" There was always a trap. Down on Earth, in a temporary settlement being built at incredible speed on the green plains of Patagonia, a young Vathari girl named Pale stepped off a transport shuttle and felt something she had never felt in her entire life. Gravity, real gravity, pulling her down towards solid ground. Pale was 9 years old, and she had been born on a ship. She had lived her whole life in corridors and cargo holds and cramped sleeping quarters with metal walls and recycled air. She had never seen a sky that was not a screen, never felt wind that was not ventilation, never touched anything that grew from the ground. Her mother held her hand as they walked down the shuttle ramp, and when Pale's bare feet touched grass for the first time, she stopped and looked down and did not understand what she was feeling. It was soft. It was alive. It moved under her toes like it was breathing. She knelt down and pressed her palms flat against the earth, and the light under her skin, that shifting, unpredictable, beautiful light that the Concorde had called a disease, burst outward in a ripple of gold and violet and green. And she did not know why she was crying, but she was, and her mother was crying too, and all around them other Vathari were stepping onto the grass and the dirt and the stone, and their lights were flaring in colors no one had ever classified, because they were the colors of relief, of grief, of gratitude so big it could not fit inside a single body. The humans who were there, the aid workers, and the engineers, and the soldiers standing guard, and the volunteers who had flown in from 6 continents, watched the Vathari light up the Patagonian dusk, and many of them cried too, even though they did not fully understand what they were seeing. On the lunar hub, Juno solved the nitrogen problem by rerouting atmospheric processors from 3 decommissioned mining stations. She solved the food problem by working with a Vathari biochemist named Tellin, who showed her which Earth compounds could be safely restructured into Vathari nutrition. She solved the bedding problem by designing a simple foam frame that supported hollow bones without putting pressure on the wrong joints. And she filed the design as open source, so every settlement on Earth could manufacture them immediately. She did all of this in 4 days, without sleeping more than 6 hours total. And when a colleague told her she was going to kill herself working this hard, she looked at him with red-rimmed eyes and said, "There are children on Deck 12 who have never eaten a full meal. I will sleep when they are fed." On the 5th day, the formal meeting happened. The Vathari delegation, led by Korath, entered the Earth Council chamber on Luna. It was not a grand room. Earth did not build grand rooms for politics, preferring function over ceremony. But it was full. Every council member was present, and Secretary General Okonkwo stood at the center, with her hands clasped and her expression calm. Korath towered over her. His delegation stood behind him like faded ghosts, their lights dim, their posture rigid with the tension of beings who had learned to expect the worst. "Secretary General," Korath said through the translator, his voice careful and controlled, "my people are grateful for the temporary shelter you have provided. We understand that such generosity comes with conditions, and we are prepared to discuss terms." He paused, then asked the question that had been eating at him since the first human ship had approached the flotilla. "What do you want from us?" Okonkwo looked up at him. She had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, and she was quiet for a moment, not because she did not have an answer, but because she wanted him to hear it clearly. "We want you to live," she said. "We want your children to eat, and your sick to heal, and your people to sleep without fear. That is what we want. That is all we want. That is enough." Korath stared at her, and he searched her face for the lie, for the hidden clause, for the price that every other species had demanded or implied. And he could not find it. He could not find it, because it was not there. And something inside him, something that had been locked tight for 2 years of running and begging and being turned away, cracked open. And his light flickered, just once, just barely, a faint pulse of blue beneath his gray skin. He did not believe her. Not fully, not yet. Trust broken that many times does not rebuild in a single conversation. But for the first time in 2 years, he considered the possibility that she might be telling the truth. On the last day of the landing operation, the final Vathari ship docked at Lunar Hub 7. Its engines had failed during approach, and a human tug had to pull it in. When the doors opened, the people inside were thin and scared and blinking in the bright human lights. And Juno was there to meet them, because she had met every single ship, and she was not about to stop now. That night, for the first time since the exile began, every Vathari in the flotilla slept under a stable roof or inside a stable hull. No one was drifting. No one was running. No one was wondering if tomorrow would be the day the fuel finally ran out. In Patagonia, Pale lay on her back in the grass and stared up at the sky. The stars were out, thousands of them, more than she had ever seen through a ship's porthole. And among them, somewhere far away, were the worlds that had thrown her people into the dark. She did not hate them. She was too young for that, and too full of the feeling of grass under her back and wind on her face. She simply looked up at the stars and let her skin glow, and the light that the galaxy had called a disease painted the Patagonian night in colors that had no name. And she whispered to no one and to everyone, "We are here. We made it. We are here." 5 years changed everything and nothing at all. The Vathari settlements had grown from emergency camps into real communities. In Patagonia, in the highlands of East Africa, in the Pacific floating cities, and in a dozen other places across the globe, where humans had made room, and the Vathari had slowly, carefully begun to build something that felt like home. It was not easy. It was never easy. The first year had been survival. Food, shelter, medicine, the basic needs that kept bodies alive. The second year had been adjustment, the slow, painful process of learning how to live on a world that was not quite right for you, where the gravity pulled a little too hard on hollow bones, and the air was a little too thin on nitrogen, and the sun was a little too bright for skin that had evolved in the dim corridors of generation ships. The third year had been frustration, when the gratitude began to fade, and the reality set in that the Vathari were not guests anymore. They were neighbors, and neighbors had to learn how to live together. By the fifth year, something remarkable had started to happen. Vathari bioluminescent art had found a human audience. Galleries in Tokyo and Lagos and Sao Paulo displayed living light sculptures that shifted and pulsed with emotion, and humans stood in darkened rooms, watching colors they had no words for, and feeling things they could not explain. Vathari musicians had begun collaborating with human composers, blending light-frequency harmonics with sound in ways that made people weep and laugh in the same breath. In the universities, Vathari engineers, who had built starships for millennia, were working alongside human scientists, and the things they were creating together were extraordinary. The humans brought improvisation and wild creativity, and a willingness to try things that should not work. And the Vathari brought precision and deep knowledge and thousands of years of spacefaring experience. And together, they were building things neither species could have built alone. But beauty and progress do not erase friction. They never do. In the fifth year, a Vathari man in the East African settlement was arrested for assault after a fight with a human shopkeeper. The details were complicated, a misunderstanding about trade customs, a gesture that meant respect in Vathari culture, but aggression in human culture, a situation that escalated because neither side could read the other's body language. But the media did not care about details. The headlines screamed about alien violence, and the comment sections filled with poison, and the protests started within a week. "Send them back," the signs read, "and Earth for humans, and they are not our problem." It was not the majority, it was never the majority, but it was loud, and loud has a way of making itself feel bigger than it is. Some of the Vathari pushed back with anger of their own. A faction within the community, led by younger refugees who had spent their formative years being rejected by the galaxy, argued that the Vathari should not have to feel grateful every single day for simply being allowed to exist. They were tired of being polite, tired of being the good refugees, tired of the unspoken expectation that they should earn their place by being quiet and useful and never causing trouble. Koreth understood both sides. He understood the humans who were afraid of change, and he understood his own people who were tired of being afraid. And he spent most of the fifth year walking between the two, trying to keep the peace, trying to remind everyone that living together was supposed to be hard, because anything worth building always is. He had changed in 5 years. The suspicion that had armored him when he first arrived had not disappeared, but it had softened, worn down by 1,000 small human kindnesses that he could not explain away. The volunteer who learned to cook Vathari food and brought it to elders every morning. The school teacher who stayed late to help Vathari children learn English and Mandarin and Swahili. The engineer who redesigned an entire subway station so that Vathari could use it without bumping their heads on the ceiling. These were not grand gestures, not political statements, just ordinary people making room for someone new. And Korath had begun to realize that this was what humans were. They were not heroes, they were stubborn. They helped because they remembered what it felt like to have no one help, and that memory lived in their bones, the way starlight lived under Vathari's skin. He began writing, a long, sprawling, deeply personal document that he called simply Notes on Humans, and in it he recorded everything he observed about the species that had taken his people in. Their contradictions fascinated him. They were capable of breathtaking cruelty and breathtaking kindness, sometimes in the same afternoon. They argued constantly and could not agree on anything, and somehow built civilizations anyway. They had fought more wars among themselves than most galactic species fought in their entire history, and yet when a million strangers showed up at their door, starving and scared, their first instinct was to set the table. "They are not a logical species," he wrote one evening, as the sun set over the Patagonian plains, and the light from nearby Vathori homes pulsed gently in the growing dark. "They are a stubborn one. They help because they remember what it felt like to have no one help them. And I do not think they can stop, even if they wanted to." Juno had nearly quit twice. The work never stopped. It simply changed shape, from emergency logistics, to long-term planning, to cultural mediation, to bureaucratic warfare with funding committees. And by the fourth year, she was running on fumes and fury and the stubborn refusal to let the system she had helped build fall apart. She lost weight, she stopped sleeping properly, she forgot what her apartment looked like because she was never in it. She was sitting in her office on Lunar Hub 7, staring at a resignation letter she had written at 3 in the morning, when a message arrived from the Patagonia settlement. It was from a Vathari family she had helped during the landing, the family that had been on the last ship, the one whose engines had failed. And it was a birth announcement. They had named their newborn daughter Juneth, which was as close to Juno as Vathari vocal cords could manage. And attached to the message was a photograph of a tiny Vathari infant, glowing so brightly she looked like a small star. Juno deleted the resignation letter and went back to work. In the 5th year, the Galactic Concord made contact for the first time since the warning. A diplomatic envoy arrived in a sleek, angular ship that made Earth's vessels look like toys. The envoy was a Tessec, an insectoid species with rigid exoskeletons and compound eyes, and a culture built entirely on hierarchy and classification. And his name was translated roughly as Adjudicator Voss. He was tall and sharp, and moved with the precise mechanical grace of a species that believed disorder was the same as death. He toured the Vathari settlements with an escort of Earth diplomats, and he said very little, but his compound eyes tracked everything. The Vathari children playing with human children in the streets, the mixed research labs, the art galleries, the shared meals, and what he saw clearly disturbed him. "This is contamination," he said to his aides in a language he did not think the humans could translate. He was wrong. Earth had been studying Concord languages for 5 years and understood every word. The formal meeting was held in the same council chamber, where Korath had first asked, "What do you want from us?" And this time, Korath was there not as a petitioner, but as an observer, sitting in the gallery with his long legs folded, and his light glowing a steady, calm blue. Adjudicator Voss stood before Secretary General Okonkwo and delivered the Concord's message with the flat precision of a being reading a verdict. Earth has been observed harboring a quarantined species in violation of Concord regulation. The Arcanate has determined that Earth will not be considered for Concord membership at any point in the future, so long as the Vathari contamination remains. Furthermore, Earth is hereby excluded from all Concord trade routes, communication networks, and diplomatic channels. "You are alone." The room was quiet. Okonkwo looked at the Tessec with an expression that was not angry and not afraid, but simply, deeply unimpressed. "Adjudicator Voss," she said, "you came a very long way to tell us that we will be punished for refusing to let children starve. I want you to carry a message back to the Arcanate." She leaned forward. "If your Concord is built on the idea that some people deserve to be thrown away, then we do not want a seat at your table. We will build our own table, and everyone will be welcome at it." Voss stared at her with his compound eyes and said nothing, because there was nothing in his training or his culture that had prepared him for a species that chose exile over obedience. He left Earth the next day, and the Concorde's blacklist went into effect immediately. No trade, no communication, no contact. Earth was cut off from the galaxy. In the Patagonian settlement that night, Korath stood outside and looked up at the stars, the same stars that had cast out his people. And beside him stood Juno, exhausted and stubborn and alive. And around them the Vaethari homes glowed with light that spilled out into the dark, like something that refused to be hidden. "They have cut us off," Korath said. "Good," Juno said. "Now we build." They came with 40 warships, and they came to make an example. 12 years had passed since the Vaethari flotilla had drifted into Sol space, and in those 12 years, Earth and the Vaethari had built something that terrified the Galactic Concorde far more than any weapon ever could. They had built proof that the Concorde's way was not the only way. Human Vaethari technology had advanced at a speed that should not have been possible. Vaethari shipbuilding knowledge, combined with human creativity, had produced a new generation of vessels, fast, adaptable, strange in ways that made Concorde analysts uneasy, because they did not fit any known classification. Earth's orbital infrastructure had tripled. The Sol system was becoming something real, something that could not be ignored, and the Concorde did not like things it could not ignore. But it was not the technology that scared the Arcanate. It was the idea. Across the galaxy, other marginalized species were watching Earth. They were whispering to each other on encrypted channels about the small blue world that had taken in the rejects and built something new. The Concorde's power depended on the belief that there was no alternative, that the Arcanate's system of classification and control was the only way civilizations could function, and Earth was proving that belief wrong simply by existing. So the Arcanate decided that Earth had to stop existing, at least as a free world. They called it a quarantine enforcement action, because the Concorde never called anything what it really was. They assembled a punitive fleet of 40 warships under the command of a Tessic admiral named Keth Vorin, and they sent it to Sol with orders to blockade Earth, disable its orbital defenses, and force the surrender of all Vaethari for processing and reassignment. It meant the genetic correction, the stripping of the mutation, the erasure of everything that made the Vaethari who they were. Earth had 12 warships. It had orbital defense platforms designed by Vaethari engineers and built by human hands. It had asteroid mining rigs that could be repurposed as weapons platforms. It had a civilian fleet of cargo ships and transports and shuttles that had never been designed for combat. It was not enough. Anyone looking at the numbers knew it was not enough. But humans had never been very good at reading numbers and deciding not to fight. The fleet arrived at the edge of Sol space on a cold morning in March, and the first thing Admiral Vorin did was broadcast a message demanding immediate surrender. The message was long and formal, and filled with legal language about quarantine authority and civilizational hygiene, and Earth's response was short. No. The battle began at the orbit of Jupiter. The Concorde fleet advanced in perfect formation, 3 lines of warships, moving in synchronized precision, their weapons charged, and their shields at full power, and they expected the human Vaethari defense force to meet them in the same way, fleet against fleet, formation against formation, the way every civilized species fought. The humans did not fight that way. The first wave was not warships at all. It was drones. Thousands of them, tiny and fast, launched from converted mining rigs hidden in the asteroid belt. They were not powerful enough to damage a Concorde warship, but they were numerous enough to overwhelm sensor arrays and create chaos in the Concorde's perfect formation. And while the Concorde fleet was swatting at drones, the human Vaethari strike force hit them from 3 directions at once. The hybrid ships were unlike anything the Concorde had seen. They were built on Vaethari frames, but modified with human improvisation. Faster, more maneuverable, equipped with weapons that changed configuration mid-fight, and electronic countermeasures that produced ghost signatures and false readings. The Concorde's targeting computers, designed to track predictable enemies, could not keep up with ships that fought like they were making it up as they went along. Because they were. Pale was in one of those ships. She was 21 years old now, tall like her mother, with shifting light under her skin that moved in patterns no one could predict. And she flew an interceptor with a human co-pilot named Marcus, who cursed loudly every time they dodged a plasma bolt, and laughed every time they landed a hit. Pale did not laugh. She was too focused for that. But she felt something fierce and bright burning inside her. Something that was not rage and not fear, but something in between. Something that said, "You threw us away and we survived, and now we are coming for you." She was not fighting as a refugee. She was fighting as a daughter of Earth. On the orbital defense platform above Patagonia, Juno commanded a crew of 200, humans and Vathari working side by side in a station that shook with every impact. The Concorde had sent 5 ships to take the platform, and Juno had nothing but the station's guns and the stubborn refusal to let anyone touch the ground beneath her. She held the line for 11 hours. 11 hours of alarms and damage reports and hull breaches sealed with emergency foam, and crew members carried to the medical bay, and replacement teams stepping up without being asked. 11 hours of a logistics coordinator who had never wanted to be a soldier, commanding a defense that military historians would study for generations. "They are not going to take this station," she said to her crew, during the 8th hour when morale was crumbling and the shields were failing, and 2 of the 5 Concorde ships were still firing. "They are not going to take this station, because below us is Patagonia, and in Patagonia there are children who have already lost one home, and I will not let them lose another." The station held. In deep space the main battle raged. The human Vathari fleet was taking terrible losses, 3 warships destroyed, dozens of smaller craft gone, hundreds of lives snuffed out in the silent dark. But they were inflicting losses too, and the Concorde had not expected that. They had expected a quick surrender, a clean operation, a primitive species folding under the weight of superior firepower. They did not get a clean operation. They got chaos and fury, and a species that had been fighting its own wars for 10,000 years, and had learned a long time ago that the side that wants it more does not always win, but it makes the other side bleed. Then the Concorde flagship fired on Station Mercy 4. Station Mercy 4 was a civilian hospital platform in high Earth orbit. It held no weapons, no military equipment, no strategic value of any kind. It held sick people and wounded people and medical staff and children, human and Vathari children, together in the same wards, being treated by the same doctors. The flagship's plasma batteries hit the station's eastern wing and tore it open like paper, and the air rushed out into the vacuum, carrying with it beds and equipment and bodies, and for 3 seconds, every communication channel in the battle went silent. 3 seconds of nothing, no orders, no chatter, no weapons fire, and then every single human and Vathari ship turned toward the flagship. Korath was on Earth when it happened. He was old now, his light fading, his bones too fragile for space, but he had access to the communication array, and he used it. He broadcast a message to the Concorde fleet on open frequency, in his own language, in the voice of an elder who had been running for 14 years and was done running. "You cast us out because we changed," he said, and his voice was steady, even as his light flickered with emotion. "These humans took us in because they change every day. You call us a contagion, but we are not the sickness. You are. Your fear is the sickness, your need to control and classify and destroy anything that does not fit in your perfect boxes. You should be afraid, not of what we are, but of what we have become together. The human Vathari fleet converged on the flagship from every direction. Civilian cargo ships rammed drones into its shield generators. Mining vessels detonated fuel reserves against its hull. Warships poured fire into its weakened armor. And Pale, who had been born on a dying ship, who had taken her first steps on Patagonian grass, who had cried light she could not name, flew her interceptor through the breach in the flagship's hull and fired everything she had. The flagship broke apart in silence, the way all things die in space, without sound, without ceremony, just light and debris, and the cold dark closing in. Admiral Vorin ordered a retreat. The punitive fleet pulled back, leaving behind 11 destroyed warships, and the wreckage of a plan that was supposed to be easy. They limped back toward Concord space, and behind them Earth stood, scarred, burning in places, mourning its dead, but unbroken. In the aftermath, as rescue ships searched the debris fields, and medics worked through the night, and families waited for names on casualty lists, a single message was broadcast from Earth, on every frequency the human communication array could reach, aimed not at the Concorde, but at every listening ear in the galaxy. This is Earth. We were attacked today for the crime of compassion. We lost people, good people, brave people, human and Vathari, and we grieve for them. But we are still here. We are still standing, and our door is still open. The galaxy heard it. Every marginalized species, every exiled people, every forgotten community on every ignored world heard it, and something shifted, not loudly, not all at once, but like a crack in a wall that has been building pressure for a very long time. Earth held a force, and the Concorde, for the first time in its ancient history, was afraid. They came one species at a time, and then they came in waves. The first to arrive after the battle were the Dreth, enormous silicate beings, slow-moving and patient, whose bodies were made of living crystal that sang when struck by light. The Concorde had exiled them 2 centuries ago for being inefficient, which was the Archanate's way of saying they thought too slowly and refused to accelerate their culture to match the Concorde's demands. The Dreth had been drifting through deep space in hollowed-out asteroids ever since, a species of philosophers and builders with no world to build on. They arrived in Sol space 8 months after the battle, and Earth said yes. Then came the Ilvani, small aquatic beings with translucent skin and 6 arms, and a reproductive cycle that the Concorde had classified as chaotic and uncontrollable. They had been quarantined on a dying ocean moon for a generation, slowly suffocating as their water turned toxic. And when they heard Earth's broadcast, they loaded every vessel they had and pointed them toward the small yellow star. Earth said yes. Then the Morvazi, a fungal collective intelligence that communicated through chemical signals and had been deemed incompatible with individual-based governance. Then the Kaleli, a nomadic species of flighted beings whose migratory patterns crossed Concorde borders, and who had been grounded and imprisoned for the crime of moving. Then 6 more species, then 12, then 20, all of them broken and tired and carrying nothing but themselves and the hope that the broadcast had been real. Earth said yes to every single one. It was not simple. It was never simple. Each species had different needs, different biology, different cultures that clashed and confused and sometimes frightened each other. The Dreth moved so slowly that human cities had to redesign entire traffic systems. The Ilvani needed vast water habitats that took years to build. The Morvasi communicated in ways that made some humans deeply uncomfortable, and the Kaleli needed open sky so desperately that enclosing them in any structure caused them psychological harm. But humanity had been dealing with difference since the first 2 tribes met at a river and decided to trade instead of fight. It was messy and imperfect, and sometimes it went wrong. But the fundamental machinery was there. The willingness to look at someone utterly unlike yourself and say, "I do not understand you yet, but I will try." 20 years after the Vathari flotilla had first drifted into Sol space, Earth was no longer a single-species world. It was the center of something new, something the galaxy had never seen before. A coalition built not on power or classification or genetic purity, but on a principle so simple it seemed almost naive. You are welcome here. They called it the Open Accord, and its founding charter was written by a committee of 30. 5 humans, 5 Vathari, and representatives from every other species that had found shelter in Sol. And the document was short because the idea was short. It said that no species would be turned away for what they were, that no being would be classified or ranked or controlled based on biology or mutation or difference, that the measure of a civilization was not its power, but its willingness to make room. The Concord called it a circus. The Arcanate's official statement described the Open Accord as a collection of defectives orbiting a primitive world, and predicted it would collapse within a decade. It grew. Vathari engineers, and human scientists, and Dreth architects, and Ilvani fluid dynamics experts, and Kaleli aeronautical designers worked together, and the things they built were extraordinary. Ships that moved through space in ways the Concord's rigid design philosophy could not replicate. Communication systems that bridged species gaps the Concord had declared unbridgeable. Habitats that adapted to dozens of different biological needs simultaneously. The Open Accord was not just surviving. It was innovating at a pace that made the Concord's intelligence agencies send increasingly alarmed reports to the Arcanate. Korath finished his book in the 19th year. He called it The Human Contradiction, and it was not a political document or a historical record. It was a love letter, written by a being who had spent 2 decades trying to understand a species that defied understanding, and had finally realized that the not understanding was the point. He wrote about their stubbornness, their chaos, their infuriating refusal to be consistent. He wrote about the volunteer who had learned Vathari cooking, about the schoolteacher who stayed late, about the engineer who redesigned a subway station. He wrote about Juno, who had nearly worked herself to death, and then kept working. He wrote about Okonkwo, who had looked at the most powerful coalition in the galaxy and said no. He wrote about Pale, who had been born on a dying ship and had become a warrior and was now, at 30 years old, the Open Accord's first Vathari-born ambassador. The final passage of the book took him 3 days to write, not because the words were complicated, but because they were true, and true things are heavy. They were not the strongest species in the galaxy, nor the wisest, nor the most advanced. They had no great empire, no ancient legacy, no claim to superiority of any kind. They were small, and young, and fragile, and they fought among themselves constantly, and they made mistakes every single day. But when the stars threw us into the dark, when every door in the galaxy closed, and every light went out, and we had nothing left, not even hope, they were the ones who opened the door. They were the ones who said, "Come in." They were the ones who set a place at the table before they even knew our names. That is enough. That is everything. Korath passed away on a warm evening in Patagonia, in a home surrounded by Vathari and humans who loved him. His bioluminescence dimmed slowly, like a sunset, shifting through every color his skin had ever produced. The blues and golds and violets and greens and colors no one had names for. And the humans and Vathari around him watched his light go out, and held each other, and wept in their different ways, for a being who had come to Earth expecting a trap, and found a family instead. The Open Accord's council chamber was full on the day Pael took the podium. 30 species were represented, 30 species that the Concorde had thrown away, and every single one of them had found their way to a small blue planet that did not care what the galaxy thought. Pale was tall and bright, her skin shifting with light that moved in patterns the Concorde had once called a disease, and she stood before that chamber with Korath's book in her hand, and her mother's memory in her heart, and 20 years of impossible, stubborn, beautiful history behind her. "We are the Open Accord," she said, and her voice carried. "We are the ones who were told we were broken, defective, contagious, unfit. We are the species the galaxy threw away. And we are standing here today because one world, one small, stubborn, impossible world, decided that thrown away does not mean worthless." The chamber was silent, and then it was not, because 30 species began to make sound and light and chemical signals that all meant the same thing. Then a technician interrupted with a priority alert. Long-range sensors had detected a new flotilla at the edge of Sol's space. Unknown configuration, unknown species, damaged ships trailing debris and frozen fuel. A distress signal was broadcasting on repeat, in a language no translator could parse. But the meaning was clear enough, because desperation sounds the same in every language. Pale looked at the alert, and she did not hesitate. She had never hesitated, not since the day she took her first steps on Patagonian grass and cried light she could not explain. "Open the channel," she said. "Tell them they are welcome. Tell them we are preparing aid and shelter. Tell them they do not need to be afraid." She paused, and she thought of Korath, and of Okonkwo, and of Juno, and of her mother holding her hand on the shuttle ramp, and of every single being who had ever been cast out and had found their way to this one small world that refused, absolutely stubbornly, beautifully refused, to close its door. Tell them they are home. And far below, on the surface of Earth, in a field in Patagonia, where the grass still grew green, and the wind still carried the scent of rain, a memorial stood where Korath's home had been. It was simple, just a stone with words carved into it, words from his book, words that school children memorized and diplomats quoted, and travelers whispered to themselves when the universe felt too big and too cold. They were not the strongest, they were not the wisest, but they opened the door, and that is everything. Above the memorial, above Patagonia, above Earth, the sky was full of ships, Vathari and Dreth and Ilvani and Keleli and Human and a dozen others, and among them, approaching slowly from the dark, came the new flotilla, wounded and scared and hoping against hope that the signal was real. The door was open, it had always been open, and the light from Earth, human light and Vathari light, and every other kind of light the galaxy had tried to extinguish, burned so brightly that it could be seen from very, very far away.